Hi, everyone, and welcome to Valley of Depth, a podcast by Archaea Media. Archaea builds media brands around the critical technologies shaping national security. We do this through Payload, which covers the space industry, Ignition, which covers nuclear energy, and Tectonic, focused on defense tech, through journalism, events, and original research. With Valley of Depth, we're going deeper, talking to founders, investors, policymakers, and military leaders who are building and shaping some of the most consequential and complex technologies in the world. Today, I'm excited to welcome Tej Bhatia, Axiom's new CEO, to the show. Axiom is building a commercial space station while offering human spaceflight missions, supporting microgravity research and manufacturing, developing next-gen spacesuits, and much more. The company partners with governments and industry to expand access to low Earth orbit. Tej and I spend time today talking about his new role, how he expects to see the company evolve, the market for space stations, the future of CLD, and much, much more. Tej, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mo. It's nice to see you.
And first and foremost, congratulations on the new role. Super exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, maybe just to kind of kick things off, can you share a little bit about what is on everyone's mind, which is the transition? Tell us a little bit about how it came about, and what were your kind of initial thoughts when the opportunity first presented itself?
Sure. So it's funny when you're saying what's on everyone's mind, which is a transition, and I'm happy to talk about it. But I'm thinking about what's on my mind. And today's my first day on the job, and you're my first meeting, my first interaction. So pretty cool. I'm honored that I get to be with you. What's on my mind though is like getting back to work. Right, the transition was leading up to Friday's announcement, and obviously it's a transition. And Cam Ghaffarian is the executive chairman of the board. He was just interim CEO, and he's going to be very much involved moving forward. I wouldn't have it any other way. So I'm very excited to get back to work. The transition itself, Cam took the helm as interim CEO maybe 8-9 months ago, and I think he had some ambitious goals to have a CEO identified pretty quickly by the end of last year. I was involved in the process, believe it or not. Having been an internal candidate, I still felt very strongly that we find the right candidate. And if it weren't me, first of all, I was very happy as CRO, and I think we were very successful. And I was able to work with our CEOs, who happen to be the founders as well, and really create a lot of value for our shareholders. And that would have been the case, whoever the CEO was going to be. And it was a pretty intense process, external and internal, with the board and some of the leadership to narrow down the candidates. And then ultimately came down to an external and an internal, and I was selected by the board to be the candidate. And it all came, I'd say, to a head on Friday when we announced to the company, but obviously we knew a few weeks before that. So the team, from an external relations standpoint, an internal communication standpoint, really put together a pretty phenomenal rollout strategy, in my opinion. And I think the reception internally and externally on Friday and continuing today has been pretty positive.
Well, like I kind of mentioned to you earlier, I'm not surprised one bit that you're sitting in the role today. You've obviously had an amazing career. So maybe tell us a little bit about that. How did you get to Axiom, and what were some of the things that you did before this?
Yeah, one of the first times you and I met was at maybe AX1 launch, maybe AX2. KSC is actually where I feel like it started for me when I was 3 years old. Never would I have thought that I'd be sitting as CEO of a company that's building a commercial space station and driving the commercialization of space. Probably at 3 years old, I probably wouldn't even be able to understand what that meant. But now that I think about it, that 3-year-old kid probably believed more in this possibility than the 30-year-old entrepreneur which is now 17 years ago for me. But I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. Childhood obsession with space. Never really did anything with it besides, being a fan. I went to school at Columbia, studied engineering. I was also really fascinated with digital video, streaming media, as we called it at the turn of the century. But I'm talking when I was in college, like CD-ROMs were the thing, and being able to stream video over the internet was like the coolest thing, and being able to do it in HD at a time where the bandwidth, the internet backbone didn't exist, and still seeing, I worked at ESPN, seeing the customer and the fan experience this new technology taught me two things. One is I just had a passion for doing the impossible, but also, creating a future that we all love and deserve. And that gave me the startup bug. And after ESPN, I had a 10-year career as a startup founder, investor-backed startup founder over 3 companies, 2 apps, one in photo sharing, one in video chatting, and then one educational technology platform. We sold 2 of the companies. And in those 10 years, I learned how hard it is to be a startup founder. While we had some success, it was a very beneficial journey for me, but it took its toll. And around the same time that I stopped being a founder, my wife and I found out we were expecting our son, and I decided I wanted to be a normal human being again and reintegrate into the matrix. And so I took the biggest possible jump in that, and I joined Citibank as an entrepreneur in residence in Citi Ventures. So I didn't really jump into the banking world, but it was on the venture side, which is a very nice bubble inside Citibank and in the fintech world. And that's when I first met Axiom Space. Some of our mutual friends pitched the Series A, and I was just blown away. I was like, I cannot believe this is real. And I started tracking the company. And then I moved over to Google, where I worked for about 4 years in a startup ecosystem role, and then in a strategic narrative role during the pandemic. And I just couldn't get Axiom out of my mind. It was around the beginning of 2020 when I invested in Axiom as an angel investor while still working at Google. And then July of 2021. So, it'll be 4 years for me in July. I joined as Chief Revenue Officer for the company. And for the last several years, it's really been focused on the commercialization of space. Obviously, very much focused on Axiom and particularly our Axiom missions. AX1 was the first all-private individual mission. AX2, we sent up the Saudis, our first government mission. They sent up a man and a woman, the first female Arab to go to the ISS. AX3 was the all-European mission, all-national mission and all Europeans, Italy, Turkey, and Sweden. Sweden through the European Space Agency, Italy direct, which is also a member of the European Space Agency. And then next month, we're sending up our 4th mission, which is also an all-national mission with India as pilot, Hungary, not through the European Space Agency, but they are a member state, and Poland through the European Space Agency, making them our first repeat customer, and all commanded by Peggy Whitson. So that's what I've been up to for the last 47 years.
And Peggy is the Axiom astronaut, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is her second mission with us.
Well, first of all, thank you for the background. I love hearing about a fellow New Yorker who shared not exactly the same, but somewhat similar kind of finance into the space industry journey. I do have to ask, so you're offered the role to be CRO at Axiom. Like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Are you thinking like, well, this is a crazy idea, but this is what I've always wanted to do. Let's see if we can make it happen. Like, what's going through your mind at the time? And how and was it like an easy yes? Did you have to think about it? Like, what was sort of the thought process?
And then let me just make sure I clarified the question. Are you talking about the CRO role when they asked me to join the company, or the CEO role when they asked me to take
CRO role when they asked you to join the company? Yeah.
So it's interesting. I wouldn't define my background or my identity as finance or necessarily even tech. Like, the identity I connect the most with was the startup founder, and it's a deep emotional connection. So in some ways, it was a very difficult decision for me because Axiom is a startup and it's at a whole different scale than most startups. So I in a sense, knew what I was getting into, or knew what I was getting back into by making that decision. And that was a difficult decision. The super easy decision was the childhood dream. Like, it was the same feeling I felt at 3 years old when my parents took me to Kennedy Space Center. It was the same feeling I felt when our friends at Axiom came and pitched Axiom to Citibank. It's like the exact same feeling. And following that thread, even when I invested in the company and when they made me the offer, it was like an explosion. I like to say, my mind, my heart, my soul all exploded at once. And there's nothing you can do when that happens. You're just fully present in the moment, and So the answer was a yes. But remember, I've got 10 years of startup experience and me. I'm going to negotiate a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not just going to jump in and say deal.
Yeah, of course.
But the harder part for me was, remember, I left startups because I wanted to be a better father and a better husband. And Google allowed me to do that. And by the way, it allowed me to really be activated as a tech leader in not just the New York ecosystem, but the global ecosystem. So to give up that lifestyle and give up that calmness, right? At a time during COVID, which was worth a lot, both financially, but also mental health and peace, to come jump into an audacious and ambitious startup like Axiom, it wasn't an easy decision, but the answer was yes from the beginning.
Yeah. Well, yeah, challenge nonetheless. I do want to jump back to the transition. Is there anything you can share about the reason for Mike's departure, the previous CEO's departure?
Yeah. Mike stepped down for personal reasons last summer. And he is still a very close friend and mentor of mine. In fact, taking the new CEO role, I value his advice, for being the founder and CEO for the first 8 years of the company. He's also an advisor to the company and an advisor to me. The way I see it is startups and companies go through various stages. And Mike, as Cam's co-founder and the first CEO for the first 8 years, was absolutely necessary to get us to this point. Literally, when you think about founder market fit, you could not get better founder market fit than Mike Suffredini and Cam Ghaffarian. So that was what was necessary to get to this point. Axiom as a company is ready for its next step. We're still very much a startup. And that's also why I think the selection of me as CEO makes sense. I'm the first non-founding CEO of Axiom, but remember, I'm a founder.
Yeah.
Not of this company, but this company and this industry needs a lot of founders. It needs us to go into founder mode, significant founder mode, to get this done for what's necessary. So I feel like the step we're in right now, and it also made sense when they brought me in as CRO, right? The founders can sell. It's time to bring in a CRO, from that 0 to 1 to 1 to 10. The thing about our industry, though, is we're not your typical tech venture where there's a clear 0 to 1 and a clear 1 to 10 and a clear 10 to 100. We're kind of 0 to 10, which is just a whole other level of challenge, right? With the odds when it comes to startups and venture investing, and then on top of that, sending humans to space. Like it's a big challenge.
What part of the original DNA are you looking at kind of preserving, and then where do you think there's evolution that's going to be needed going forward?
Yeah, what I think the industry needs right now is the ultimate marriage of space and startups. So when you say what original DNA, think of the origin story. Think of the last 50, 60 years of space and everything that's been done. The whole reason we're all so passionate about it, right? It's because these legends, these heroes have literally put people and stations in space. Like it's amazing to sit, with the people who've done it before. At the same time, it was done in a pure government environment, and not good or bad. It's what had to happen. So now when we switch to the commercial era, it's not you flip a switch and now a bunch of startup guys, in jeans and t-shirts can just get it done. There's a lot of very serious engineering and safety and protocol that has to go in. And by the way, diplomacy and geopolitics that have to go in. And at the same time, managing for shareholder value, managing budgets and cost effectiveness in a highly capital intensive industry. You need the best of the startup world, you need the best of the space world. There's no compromise there.
Yeah. Well, so if we were talking practical terms, right, like year one, April 28th, 2026, like what are your immediate priorities as I know it's day one on the job. I know there's a lot going on, but if you were to think high level, your immediate priorities.
Yeah. I like to figure out the first week, first 100 days, first year, based on my desired outcomes. And I don't want to shoot too far as what that outcome is, but what do I hope in, let's say, I like to say a World Cup cycle or a presidential cycle. Pick your poison, right? 4 years, though. They're both 4 years. What do I want to see at the end of the 4 years, and then work backwards from there? And I stated this to the company on Friday. And when I was going through the interview process for CEO, really getting down to my real why, which is not the space passion that you need that, right? In any startup, like if you're not passionate about this, you're not going to make it. But my real why, and like I wanted to say, because I always wanted to be an astronaut, but like I also wanted to be Batman at some point. Like it's like what's the real business why for me? And I know it really well. My goal is to build a forever company. And a forever company is a company that lasts forever, but for two reasons. One is it's creating so much value for customers, shareholders, employees, and the world that it will be around forever. And we have many of those, by the way. The top 5, 6, 7 companies in the world didn't exist 40 years ago. They're all venture-backed tech companies. They're all multi-trillion-dollar market cap companies, that were told it was impossible. So we have a lot of evidence that we can create forever companies. By the way, at the amount we're raising, all space startups are raising, we better be forever companies, because that's the only way our investors will make their money back. So the forever company, first part is the business side. The second part is a company that I want to work at forever. And kids coming out of college want to work here, and their children want to work here. And I've had glimpses of those in my career. My first job out of college was during the dot-com boom. I really felt it was a company designed for people and culture, but unfortunately only lasted 2 years. I tried to recreate this in all my startups and didn't quite get there. I didn't feel like I accomplished it. And Google is a phenomenal place. I really felt I touched that little bit of Eden there. And that was 20 years after they started. So, there's a lot of learnings there. So that's my goal, in a couple of years. And I think that's a goal for all our investors, that we are going to build a once-in-a-lifetime, multi-generational, transcending, transitional company. So that's the ultimate goal. So how does that work back to the first year, the first 100 days, the first week? Well, there's several things we need to do on the business side and the culture side to get there. The culture side, really creating that belief that impossible is just an opinion. Impossible is an opinion given by other people that tell you can't do something. And we should be motivated by the words impossible and can't, because our job in life is to show the rest of the world what is possible so that the bar keeps going up, right? So that's on the cultural side, and that started on Friday, and that's going to continue. Actually, you've probably seen my LinkedIn posts over the last month where everyone says my face is so zoomed in those videos, but that's really me talking just on my vision and my belief. So that's on the cultural side. On the business side, it's really shifting this company to growth mode. I fundamentally believe that our job, and all startup founders' jobs, especially in space, is to identify the business model. And until you've identified a scalable, repeatable, exponential business model, you're still a startup. And even after you do, you should still behave like a startup. But until that business model is found, we're all in startup mode. And by the way, it has not been found for the space industry. I think I know the code. I think I've cracked it, actually. And I think the next year is really about implementing that business model. So get to your question, what's going to happen in that year? But that business model, to me, is a shift from a revenue mindset, which made sense for the CRO, to a growth mindset, and how we productize the work we've done with me as CRO and scale it over the next year so that we become a forever company.
Yeah, well said. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the things you've alluded to by switching gears and talking about the market. Let's just start with a general question. I've had a few or a couple other kind of CEOs of companies building space stations, and I always love to get this perspective, which is, let's talk about the market for a free flying space station. How much of the current, maybe let's talk a little bit about the ISS spend. How much of it do you think you'll capture? What's the business case? I know you've spent a lot of time on this question, both as an investor and also now as part of the company. Like, what is the market for a free flying space station?
Yeah. I mean, I first wanted to acknowledge how cool it is what you just said, right? You've spoken to a few CEOs of space station companies. It's mind blowing, like the fact that even just a few years ago, you and me sitting having this conversation would
Yeah.
would be fun. But this is real. This is very real. And to get to the market answer that you're looking for, you're right. I've done a lot of thinking about this. And when I joined Axiom, I joined on the hypothesis that this is a supplier constrained market. And what I mean by that is I'm talking about human spaceflight, getting humans to these stations. There is a single provider that can do that, SpaceX, and it's awesome, right? And they can do it on repeat, and they're going to do it at much larger scale. But it's still constrained by that one way for people to get up and down. So as a investor in Axiom, and then as an executive, how do I look at the market and create a growing market that's growing so much faster than all providers in the field, which, by the way, is very common. I come from the cloud world, cloud computing, and the terrestrial cloud market is growing faster than Amazon, Google, Microsoft combined, right? So I just imagine space will be the same. But in those early dynamics of a market, my hypothesis and my goal was, okay, if supply is constrained, let's go lock in the demand side of the market. And let's make the limiting factor supply, not demand, because that's going to force everything to move forward. And we had the first 4 missions, and it's a challenge. You've got these 4 missions. How do you fill seats? It's very expensive. Can you sell? They bring in this guy from the startup world who has never sold to governments before. The beginning assumption that everyone is telling me is that it's a 5 to 10 year sales cycle. You got to get into the procurement budgets of countries like India, Saudi, Italy, the US. Like how is it going to? We did deals. First of all, I haven't even been here for 4 years, right? It's 4 years is 2 months from now. And in May, we'll send up our 16th astronaut. 4 missions. No, it's actually 14 because Peggy and MLA got to go twice. But sending all these nations, AX4, India, Poland, and Hungary have never sent a citizen up to the ISS. This is all of their second astronauts ever. And coincidentally, it's almost 40 years after their first astronaut went up. This is historic beyond means. And this was impossible before, right? And these were done in timelines of at most 3.9 years. But our fastest deal was less than 30 days. From phone call to money in the bank. Some dude from New York picking up the phone and money being in the bank from another country and another continent, New York, in 30 days. And by the way, there was only one startup New Yorker in that whole mix, which was me. And my only job was to make the phone call and check the bank account. Everything in between happened by the legends we get to work with. And so really in terms of the market, what I believe now is not about supplier constrained or no idea if we have demand. There's more than enough demand. Now the limiting factor is supply. So this is ready to pop in a great, great, great way. So to answer your question, which most people ask in a slightly different way, which is there room for more than one station? Well, first, I hope there's room for one, right? And that requires a strong private-public partnership in the U.S. U.S. government, NASA, and the private companies to make sure that we have a station, right? Make sure there's no gap in low Earth orbit presence. Make sure that U.S. diplomacy is driven by the incredible entrepreneurship and ingenuity we have in this country. It's the time for that. So, there's room for one if the U.S. government gives it, but I think there's room for thousands, and there's nothing in between. It's literally not. If we're talking 2 or 3, we're playing JV, maybe Pee Wee League. You want to play Pro League? Like, no, that first one that gets up there is going to be the platform that identifies multiple species transforming business models. And that's going to happen this decade. And if that happens, trust me, it's not going to be 1, 2, or 3 stations. That's the beginning of our civilization off planet. And we get to do this.
So in your kind of vision of potentially, call it 1,000+ stations, like how many operators are there though? Like, sure, I agree that there could be, many space stations, but I'm curious how many operators you think there'll be.
That's a very good question. I never thought of it that way. There'll be at least one Axiom because we'll be a
Well,
forever.
I guess
Yeah,
what I'm getting at really is like, does the business model allow you to allow for multiple operators to like
yeah.
generate like revenue
Let
and
yeah let's
profitability?
let's map this out. So the future that I'm looking at is Axiom's a forever company, and there's a full-on economy and thriving business and multiple business models, right, that happen up there. But let's look at what those business models could be, and instead of guessing, let's just go back. Let's look at historical patterns from our lifetime or my lifetime, which is the internet. And 30 years ago, 1995, of the internet, where maybe advertising was a model, e-commerce kind of, and now cloud computing, mobile, AI, all that's happening, building on top of that. There's no way in 1995 we would have predicted what this was. So if we looked at 1995, you got like Netscape, you got Microsoft, Google hadn't been founded yet. Yahoo was around, Sun. So you got a couple of big players. Nobody would have thought these little upstarts would have come out. Then it explodes. There's a lot of companies. Now the big businesses, like the $1 trillion companies. We're just looking at the top, you're looking at Alphabet, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Nvidia, Meta, like these companies. They're all covering different parts of the stack, some competing like cloud and whatever, some joining different stacks later. Um, Multiple operators. I mean, but I don't even see, like, even when I think about the internet today, I don't see it that way. I see it as an ecosystem. You've got these huge giants and nodes, but our friends and other things we talk about outside of space, just think how much investment is going into all these other amazing things right now.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to predict.
Well, so what do you make of the argument that, and this I've heard from just investors who are looking at the space in general, and you could call them generalist investors that clearly are not maybe are not as plugged in, but this argument that sort of the productive mission spend that occurs on the ISS today, which is something in the order, if my calculations are correct, like call it half of what the total spend is, which is I think something like 3.5 billion. And so I think the perspective is that like a lot of that productive mission spend are just science projects with not a lot of no real commercial off ramp or like ability to scale. What do you make of that argument? Obviously I know you don't agree with the argument, but what do you make of that argument?
Yeah, let me put it. It's not that I don't agree with the argument. I think it's a fact, right? I don't think, and again, it's not good or bad. It's been a government platform, and I've had this debate many times with some of our advisors who were instrumental in the space station globally for doing this. And when I say things like we're going to identify the business model in the next few years, they say things like, well, we didn't find the holy grail over those decades, yet you're going to do it in a matter of years. And I said, yes, but it's not mutually exclusive. It's building on that. So, if you look at all of human history, how much time it looks like things are gradual and then all of a sudden they're instant. We're in that moment for space. So those science experiments, I think there's two fundamental problems that we can absolutely fix. Everything I think they did before was essential, foundational, and correct. Sure, maybe there were some inefficiencies. And look, $3.5 billion is a lot of money, but it's also not a lot of money, right? Like orders of magnitude, what we're talking about to build a space station infrastructure is less than what Google and Amazon spent, per year to put fiber across the Atlantic at a time where there was no business model. So there's plenty of capital if there's will. And again, the order of magnitude is less than what I think AI is going to require. So so we're talking in the same world. The two challenges that I see that came out of this, the science, and it's probably, by the way, it's not the science, it's not the government, it's the business side of it. One is data cycle time. What good is an experiment if you're sending it up and you don't get your data for 18 months, right? And you can only send a little bit up and one thing is done. In my first startup, when we discovered a viral loop, and I don't mean that in a science way, although it was a scientific epidemic formula, but once our product caught on, I was making A/B decisions on where a button should be placed with 10,000 data points in less than 15 minutes. That's how many people were hitting it, and I could decide. I didn't have to think. The data would tell me red button, blue button, or no button. And the answer was actually no button that worked because people are going to click on something. This had to do with our product, but that's how entrepreneurs work these days. And now with AI, you're moving so fast. If you're a space entrepreneur and you're like, hey, I'm going to do my demo and then it's going to go up on whatever, and then someone's going to do something, and then I might get the data and I'll let you know in a year and a half if I got the grant. In that time, I would have probably failed 3 startups and already been on the 4th one, point is we got to get faster. So one is data, right? The cycle time. And by the way, like I said, I don't think the limiting factor is demand anymore, it's supply. We can keep filling these missions with people, with projects, with corporations. If you could give me a mission a day, I could fill it. I can almost guarantee that. Now, the second part of it, though, is how do you create enterprise value? And I'll use pharmaceutical as an example. All these amazing steps towards progress to incredible cures, incredible discoveries that have been happening and will continue to happen, they're not enough for a pharma CEO to go to the street and get rewarded for it. If a pharma CEO tomorrow goes to the street and says, I have this new weight loss drug or preparation for the next pandemic or something else, and we're going to spend $8 billion to test it out, their stock might go up. If a pharma CEO went and said, we're going to spend $1 billion on space, a fraction of what they spent on a new drug, people are going to be like, what's wrong with you? And I don't think there's anything wrong. It's just there isn't that bridge from science experiment to shareholder value. Yeah, there's a business case, and other examples are Zblan and you name it. Everything that we hear in our industry that scientifically is correct. Put yourself in the shoes of a CEO whose sole job is to increase shareholder value, right? It's very hard. And by the way, taking crazy venture risks is part of that. But why is it that all this capital goes to AI, again, at the same orders of magnitude that we're doing when you go to space, it becomes much more difficult to make that argument. It's still a bet, right? So we need to build those bridges, faster data time and a much better enterprise value story.
So let's flip it back to Axiom for a second specifically, which is like right now, obviously, we're talking about space station. There's a lot of other things that you guys do. Maybe talk to me a little bit about the primary revenue streams and how you see how do you see those revenue streams diversify? Maybe talk about what it looks like today and how it kind of diversifies over the next 4 years.
And I like how you state this primary revenue streams. How they diversify or how they converge. And to me, it's one and the same. So let me address it. So, we have our missions, which were a large driver of revenue, an area that I was, very much involved in over the last couple of years. Also very high cost. It's just the nature of the current state of the market. But we proved there's demand. We proved there's ability to make money. There has to be other things that need to be done in the industry and in our company for us to do this at scale, but we've got a great foundation. We have our spacesuit contract. I'd say that's probably the largest contract and driver of revenue that we have, but along with the mission. Then we've got our core business, which is the space station. And I say core business because it's not driving revenue at this time. There is funds from the contract that we get, but that's our venture bet. That's the platform we're taking. And those are the 3 main revenue lines. We've done a few other things, and then, like I said, I'll explain how they converge as opposed to diversify. We recently announced the launch of the first 2 nodes of our orbital data center, our orbital data center network, which we call a heterogeneous network. So think of homogeneous like a constellation or a data center network here on Earth. Each of our modules on our station is also a node in the network, and there can be specific modules that get sent up without humans or with humans, partnering with other companies in our industry that are doing cool things, and maybe they're doing return vehicle stuff for pharma, that itself could be a node, even if it's temporary or ephemeral. And the key here is the data. On each of our missions, we did quite a few corporate partnerships and sponsorships. And we have a few other lines of business in pharmaceutical and advanced materials that we're working on. So the reason I want to say converge more than diversify, I hope we have many more of those businesses, but this is getting back to the point of figuring out what the business model is, not just for the company, for the industry. There's a couple ways you can look at all the businesses we do. Some people think it's all over the place and it's too many things, but it comes down to two ways that I look at it. One is, think of us as a space infrastructure company, space infrastructure as a service, if you like, but really designed to sending more astronauts to space and keeping them safe while they're up there. Where are they going to go? How are they going to explore? What are they going to build when they're there? And when you look at it from that model, everything fits into it. Our missions, our station, our suits, orbital data centers, the pharmaceutical and advanced materials work that we're doing. Another way to look at it as we're defining the market, we're also building the marketplace. They're buyers and sellers. U.S. government is a buyer. India is a buyer. India can also be a seller. Their startups inside their country can be sellers. Turkey was a buyer, but they now have a whole startup space sector that's feeding back into the supply chain, not just for Axiom, but for other customers. So in that case, sometimes Axiom's a buyer, sometimes Axiom's a supplier, but we're really building out this marketplace with all the services needed for a country to build a human spaceflight program. Now, what we've shown is many countries that 5 years ago wouldn't have even written human spaceflights in their space strategy, multiple of them have flown. So now you're seeing all the nations of the world flip their model. That doesn't mean the other things that they do in space are going to stop. So now this marketplace is even more valuable, where this is what I tell to all other businesses in our industry, including our competitors, which is there is so much business out here. There's so much value on the table. And what I've created an expertise over the last 4 years is going and finding it. I'm not going to hoard that. It's still good for me if our economy doesn't shoot up this year, right? Like that inflection point. So there's more demand than there is supply. And there's so many of these space startups that, in my opinion, aren't hustling in the right way. They're obviously hustling because they're dedicating their lives to a startup. But if you're chasing one contractor, you're chasing one grant, and you're not covering the entire field, creating value up and down the ecosystem stack with a strategic narrative that's authentic to you and solves the customer's problem that you might not even know what it is yet, then I think you're wasting your time. So we've seen it. And like I said, the time is now. Like I don't even think I can contain my excitement. Like I literally just got a second chance to do what I missed in the 90s because possibly I graduated 1 year too late. Right? Like it's just, and this happens to be about my other passion, which is space.
Can we talk a little bit about CLD? So like NASA's obviously created this program to award multiple station providers the ability to build. Let's start with that before I editorialize any further, and talk about like what do you think about the CLD program, and maybe talk a little bit about what should happen with the CLD program. I think there's a lot of open-ended questions right now around it, and across a lot of different NASA programs. But let's just kind of stick with CLD.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the historical context of the CLD program, which I believe is essential to U.S. national security and its position in the world right now. And I think the strategy from the beginning, which I believe has now spanned 3 administrations, has been very much about avoiding this gap in low Earth orbit and handing over destinations to commercial companies, kind of like we did with crew and cargo. And it worked, but there was a gap then, so to prevent that. So I've been a big fan of this strategy long before I even, investor joined in Axiom. I invested in Axiom, though, when the first step of that was the CDISS contract, the port contract that Axiom won and has the exclusive right to attach its modules to the ISS. I think that's a very key part of this strategy. And then over time, the program, CLDP, I think it was called, that's where you've got, the free flyers coming in, and now you've got CLD phase two, the services, which will be what happens after. So I think that's all really good strategy by the government. What I think should happen with it, like I said, I think the government needs to lean in a little more. And I'm not at all talking about spending more money. I'm actually thinking, there are ways to do this right for the taxpayer, but it's really about committing to what needs to happen. And this is for the entire United States. This isn't entire United States and the Western world. I'm not speaking just on behalf of our company and our shareholders right now. That commitment and that decision needs to be made. And just going back to the question of, is there room for one or multiple? Either way, the strategy to kind of spread it across a few players is not good. You either go all in and get one, or you take a venture approach and spread the money and do seed funding. So I think there has to be some decisions made. But I think more importantly, before that is just realize that China has a station up there and has had it manned for a while, and if we don't make those moves now, it's very risky for all of us. With all that said, and like I said, I think CLD should move forward. It should move faster. They should put their efforts towards one winner and just make it happen. Just let's do it.
Yeah, and by the way, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but like there is an important point, right? Because like I think there's this perspective that, look, let's not forget that the ISS cost the American taxpayers $100 billion, right, to build. And when you have a CLD contract that's like, here's 150 million, or here's 160 million, whatever, like, you know what I mean? Like a couple $100 million. Then go use that as a proof point to go and raise capital from investors who are not used to funding space stations, right? So like, this is what I would hate to see, which is I think what you're alluding to a bit, which is like NASA, take this approach, and then all of a sudden no one can win because you're not spending enough time on a provider that's actually showcasing some technical milestones or like pushing the needle forward. And I think that is sort of, maybe my own opinions are coming out as I'm trying to be neutral, but I think you're alluding to something important, which is like, at the end of the day, like, yes, it's great in the beginning. Let's be a venture program and like, let's seed a bunch of companies. But as those companies are trying to be more established, it is important to start to concentrate your efforts.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly, and I'm gonna borrow that from you at some point. Like we're in danger of creating a situation where no one wins, and fundamentally, my approach as a leader, as a business person, as an entrepreneur in this industry, and now as CEO of Axiom, is I'm not playing a game where this is zero sum or winner takes all. I'm playing a game where I only win if everybody else wins. And that includes my direct competition. And that's a big burden to carry, because it's not just about winning, but it's about making sure we all win. So to your point is the risk we have is, and again, this could just be the difference between government and venture capital. We all know startup odds. So if you were to put money towards something, anything, you can't imagine that 4 companies will give you a success outcome, right? Venture capitalists know you invest in 10 with the hopes that one hits. And by the way, the one that hits has to pay out, the entire fund, because that's the only way you make money, but also the other 9 are going to lose. So again, it's just statistically, it was a strange move to not, do a portfolio strategy, but also knowing how challenging space is, how hard space is. Once you got the few, you got to put all your resources, like you got to help win, right? Otherwise everyone loses and we lose our position in it. One other thing I would say though is, and this is maybe education between government and the startup world, is there's more than enough capital. Just look at every AI company getting funded. Like there is so much money out there for the right businesses, because it's about creating value. And what venture capitalists don't understand is this approach that you said, but also this binary approach tied to a contract. They're all about binary. Like literally, you're going to fail, you're not. And then what's the IRR on my fund? But most VCs don't invest in federal contracts because they don't actually create enterprise value. It's dollar in, dollar out. Maybe you make a 20% margin on it. That's not the game we're playing in. And then now to actually put all that on a contract that's not that big, that's not going to cover the cost, is all of a sudden forcing investors to sit on the sidelines and wait for what? And then the point that you made for the government, from the government standpoint, is by taking this strategy, it actually loses the opportunity to tap into somewhat limitless capital sources and creative ways to make sure the taxpayer is actually not burdened with this in the future.
Yeah, no, it's actually a good point. It's funny when people say to me like, oh, well, all these space companies are raising billions of dollars and they don't have access. They don't even, they don't have a product, or they haven't put anything into space. It's funny where you're like, well, there's literal like AI startups that are raising $1 to $2 billion before they have a product. And it's just people, yeah. So like the capital is 100% out there, no question. I know we're kind of running short on time. I want to get through a few other quick things. I want to talk about the technical roadmap on the station. Where does it stand right now? Let's just talk through that real quickly. What is the next? What is sort of the game plan to get the station up and running?
I believe you know this. We recently announced, or maybe not so recently, we did a resequencing of the station, which I think is brilliant, by the way. It's when I first came in, it wasn't my idea, but when I first came in, I did ask the question, of the old sequence, which had the first, 5 modules, 2 HABs, Earth Observatory Lab and Power Tower. And working with the customer, with NASA, we resequenced it. So the first module we call it PPTM, Power Payload Thermal Module. That allows a few things. One is it actually does accelerate the timeline and the schedule. I know that seems a little strange because it's beyond where we originally started, but it did accelerate things. Second, it allows us to detach sooner if we need to. So we don't have to wait for the fully finished Axiom station to detach if for any reason ISS had to deorbit or we needed to transfer assets sooner and be a commercial platform. So that's the latest update. That review with NASA is complete and it's in the works. The plan is still for that first module to make its way to Houston, then eventually to Florida to launch up.
Got it. And then on the astronaut side, on the astronaut missions, how do you think about that program expansion under your leadership? Like, are there things that you're thinking about, countries you're targeting, regions of the world you're targeting that you feel like are untapped? Yeah. And also, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit about how you're thinking about, I don't know how much you can share about this, but just pricing strategy around astronauts.
Sure. What I'd love, I'll start with that one. I'd love for there to be a real pricing strategy, right? Like let the market define,
Yep.
What it should be. Right now, the problem is it's very much cost plus mindset. What does it cost to send someone or something up, cost per kilogram, or just basically what the launch provider tells you what it costs, and then you go build your business on that, and then you tie the milestones of the payment to what the vendors are doing. And to me, that's just very backwards. That's not at all a customer-centric approach. I understand why that's where we are now, but that's going to change. What I spent over the last 4 years was going out and talking to every customer, every prime minister, every world government across multiple administrations in those nations. Again, not something I would have ever predicted I would even be good at. And what we've seen is when I sit and I talk to them about the astronaut missions, by the way, I don't go in and say, hey, do you want to buy a seat on a mission? I go and see what's going on, right? Introduce myself. This is what we're doing. How can I help? And what I've seen is in sending a country's astronaut up, first of all, you build so much trust, and second, you become the default expert on all things space for them. When they have a question, they call us. When we sit in meetings, we discuss their 10-year strategy for all things LEO, lunar, Mars, deep space exploration, and human space flight. So again, there's just a lot of value on the table. And I spent the last 4 years building a system at Axiom where we could go sell, I'll say anything to a government. That anything happened to be missions to space. And the building pipeline for Suits and Station and Orbital Data Center enters. But that second part that I just said really was the transition where we go from revenue to growth, which is building a system that can sell everything to governments. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to sell everything to governments, but you build a productized, scalable system unlocking up demand. And that's what we've done. And I think those dynamics change. Those dynamics have changed the industry, and literally day one, like my phone calls this afternoon and tomorrow will be about that. What that means for Axiom moving forward is we will continue to do missions, right? We're a human space flight company. Obviously, that's our heritage and that's our future. When it comes to the first AX missions, AX1 through 4, and going to the ISS, it's, again, phenomenal opportunity. But really what it is a ramp up to create significant opportunities for multiple nations, multiple corporations to have access to space. So really what I'd like to do now with two things. One is the credibility of having done it and done it commercially while driving U.S. diplomatic interest forward and having the trust of all the nations at a time where trust is more important than ever and frankly has been broken a little bit, that we as a private U.S. company can actually be that bridge for space. And what I hope to get to is not this zero-sum approach where we're competing for a limited artificially limited resource and actually thinking about it from a mindset of abundance and creating the opportunity for the platform to scale as long as there's demand. An example I always give is imagine if in 1995, and again, I'm going back, the founders of Google, this may be more 98, 97, but the founders of Google are like, should we put fiber across the Atlantic? Should we run it to the west coast of Africa? It's only 1990s, and we're saying the business model is advertising, but we don't know what it is. And VCs are giving them a ton of money, which is spent $5 billion a year. But imagine if instead they sat down and said, what's the cost per kilobit? Are we going to make a 20% margin on it? Literally, you and I would not be sitting here right now on our computers doing this, right? So we need to switch. There's the capital there, and it's all just a measure of value. And I don't put the onus on the venture capital world. They're just risk mitigators and money managers, right? I put the onus on the entrepreneurs. What's the world that you want? What's the world that you're building, and how do you value it? And if you don't value it, no one's going to give you your money, right? And by the way, the value I'm talking about is not a dollar amount. The value I'm talking about is deep in your heart, deep in your soul, not even what you know and what you believe, but what you are here on this planet for, which, by the way, I believe it's for us to get off the planet, not leave the planet, not abandon it, but really improve humanity, because we're always asking, why are we here? What are we here for? And if we can't understand that out there and we can't understand that inside, then I think we're just complacent. So going back to what I think needs to happen is founders, man, you got to tell a better story. You got to tell a story of that kid at 3 years old who was just daydreaming nonstop about astronauts in space or whatever your thing is. I don't know what it is, but that's where you start from, because the rational, logical argument is just not going to work with governments or with investors.
What do you think prospective investors miss or like don't get right when they're looking at stations as a business?
That's a very good question. And again, I don't put this on the investors. I think the only reason they're getting stuff wrong or they're missing something is because the space entrepreneurs are telling them that stuff. CLD is a perfect example, right? There's only room for one, or will it be 2, 3? Again, that's not how venture capitalists think, right? They are going for home runs. What I'd love for every startup founder, especially space startup founder, is just to sit in a VC fund for a little bit and understand that the investors are startup founders themselves, and they're getting money from other people. And if you do basic startup math, right, 10 investments, let's say $1 billion in each investment, right? You know you're going to lose 9, probably more. So you got to watch those, and the one that's going to hit, it doesn't need to just make back $1 billion, and it doesn't need to just make back $10 billion, because by that point, you're not making money. You're paying just your investors back, and they're not getting a return. They're just getting their money back. So it needs to make about $100 billion for you to actually be a successful fund and you to make your carry, your 20% above the fees. So now you're talking about $100 billion invested, but $100 billion need to be returned, $1 billion coming from one company. VCs don't own 100% of the company, right? Like they own 10% or whatever. So to get that kind of return for the fund, if every space founder is not out pushing for $1 trillion market cap company, they're not aligned with their investors. Now, this is not good or bad. It's just a lot. You see this in all startup sectors. People don't really understand that venture is a class and a type of investment. It may not be right for you. If you're a federal contractor, be a federal contractor, right? If you're a bootstrap business that's going to grow, great. But if you're swinging for the fence, and this is not a judgment on anyone, it's just knowing that you're telling the right story to the right audience. And what I think investors miss, again, is this tie to these contracts that are zero sum. And I think what founders miss is thinking that $1 billion is a lot of money. You know, like it's like how you teach kids the orders of magnitude, like of value creation. And I don't think venture has to change. I don't think space has to change. I think there has to be a new breed of entrepreneurs that are bridging the middle.
Interesting. Okay, so then let me ask you a more, I guess, question specific to Axiom, which is how much capital do you think you're going to need to get V1 space station online? Is that something you can talk about? Like what are, capital that you'll need, and then sort of, near-term fundraising plans?
It's a very good question. I like the other ones. I'll start with the last part of your question. I mean, near-term fundraising plans is like, that's day one. It's been before day one for me to raise our next round. And by the way, that is my background. In the last 4 years, I haven't been doing fundraising for Axiom. I've been focused 100% on sales, but I am an investor in the company. And, my 3 startups were all investor-backed. Never to this scale, but, I tell people I pitched those companies 1,000 times. And the reason I say 1,000 times is because I've actually pitched 992 times, and I don't want to be a weirdo that knows that exact number.
Is that right? Is that true? 992. Okay, wow. All right.
I measure everything, and only 28 of those pitches were successful, but they were the 28 that mattered. They raised money for my company, or they sold the companies. But I learned a shit ton from the 964. It was awful. Rejection sucks, and it's like a beatdown. I remember one mentor telling me like it builds character, and I'm like, what character does it build? But it does. But so I haven't applied that at all to Axiom yet, and I'm excited to. I built the credibility not on the venture side. I built that a long time ago, but I built it now on the space side, right? I built it on space commercialization side. So to answer your question, it's going to take a lot of money. But the reason I can't give it a specific answer is something very pointy you said is V1 of the space station. And I'm learning over the last 4 years that one of the challenges where space and startups are going to have in meeting is literally vocabulary. Same language, English, but words have different meanings. Revenue means something different in the federal contracting world than it does in high-tech startups. Business development means something very different in federal contracting than in high-tech startups. Program management means something very different than it does in high-tech startups. So, a guy coming from Google and thinking program management something else, that was my level or whatever I was at Google as program manager. When I came in and told Suf that, he's like, well, I was program manager of the ISS. I was like, yeah, I think we're talking about different things. My job was to build like a credits program for Google Cloud, but okay. Yeah. So I think there's just a big discrepancy that can be resolved slowly with vocabulary. So V1, what does V1 mean for a space station? Does it mean just get something up there and then figure it out? Does it mean the full-on design of the station? Because how do you actually build a modular station if you don't know the full power needs and requirements of the entire station? So V1 itself means something different. I'd like to believe that V1 means the first module connecting to the ISS with the same architecture and plan of the overall station. But now that we've resequenced it, knowing that we can build it as we attach and detach, as opposed to having it all be done and then iterate on it. And
Well, yeah, let me do an apples to apples, and I'm not holding you to any number, but like space, a space station costs 100 billion, like I mentioned earlier. You know, I like to think of stations as like real estate plays. So you can sort of think of it as a cap rate, looking at your rental income, and then kind of figuring out like what's the right cap rate. Now I know that's a crude way of looking at it, but I think it's an interesting analogy. So this ISS costs $100 billion. Do you think a station of that size and scale will cost Axiom? Let me just throw out a number: under 5 billion when all said and done.
yeah, so and I appreciate that you're being careful to not that and
Hey,
I don't
first day
think
on the job. I don't want to get you in
yeah
trouble.
yeah but I think it's okay to be bold. I bold and prudent at the same time. And I know I do think it's 5%. I think if we're talking 10%, maybe we're not being as efficient. Like the ISS cost 15 governments $100 billion. And by the way, awesome. That proved international collaboration. But that's not sustainable moving forward, and they know that. And so yeah, let's say it's 5 billion or less. Right now, again, we're talking orders of magnitude that are very normal for tech VCs. So let's just assume the money itself is not the problem. It's not just building it though, right? It's launching it and operating it. But to your point, and if you look at our architecture, it's modular, right? So do you actually need the 5 billion up front? I'd love to have that, but no, you don't, right? You can actually, V1 can mean hitting certain milestones and making sure you have the cash flow to get it launched and started.
So okay, fair enough. And then the last thing I do want to ask, because we didn't actually talk about it, is SpaceX. So you guys are one of the largest, I don't know if not the largest, single commercial customer of SpaceX. I got to imagine you're up there, right? What do you think? Do you think SpaceX is going to bid on, or is going to be part of CLD? Or do you think they're going to try to really push forward this idea of like Starship as a space station? I know a lot of people are speculating that, but kind of curious, like and I know at this point, largely it's a matter of opinion, but curious what you think.
Yeah. I don't have any specific information or, even an opinion on what they would do in terms of CLD or a station. What I would say though is, they're a phenomenal partner to us, right? We work with them, and I think they're also a key pillar of the ecosystem. What I'll say about Starship is I can't wait, right? Like, A, it's awesome, but then second, and B, it's necessary. And we've seen, like, remember, I'm telling you, I think it went from it's a supply constrained, my hypothesis, supplier constrained market to corner the demand to now supply is a limitation, right? So the more we can send up, the more volume, the more people we can send up is great. My understanding of, the vehicle and the purpose of it, right? It has to maintain life for long periods of time. So I think that's good. Now the challenge I see in that speculation, and speculation is not even the right word. It is opinion right now. We're not talking a huge window of opportunity to get this right? We're talking the rest of this decade, maybe less, and we're talking about China having a fully manned station and sending other countries up. Like that next chapter is here, and you're seeing it bifurcate already. And when I'm out in the field, I get it. Here in the States, we talk about this competition and CLD and the CEOs of the stations coming. Again, it's still phenomenal to me that this is real. But again, we're playing this kind of zero-sum game around a contract. When I'm out in the field, I'm not talking to anyone about any other competition. We're talking about China. And that's the world. And I'm not a geopolitical diplomacy guy. I'm a startup hustler from New York who was able to get a bunch of deals done pretty quickly that everyone thought was impossible. And I was able to send citizens up to space and bring them back. Yeah, when I sit with our friends around the world, they talk to me very directly. And yeah, I'm not sitting here and talking to them about this stuff. We're talking about where the world's going. And I can tell you it's going in one of two ways. And we really need it to come our way.
Yeah, no, very well said. Ted, what do you do for fun when you're not building space stations?
What do I do for fun? Well, this is fun, right? I think one of the challenges I've always seen with my leadership approach is, to me, there's no such thing as work-life balance. Like, it's not a zero-sum game. It all gives me so much energy. There is such a thing for founders as work identity balance. And when I say founders, I don't just necessarily mean startup founders. I think, people in our industry, my colleagues that I see, this is our mission, right? It's so much, and that's dangerous. It's really good to get shit done, but it really makes all of yourself part of that process. So yeah, work is a lot of fun for me. This job is more fun than I could have ever imagined. My job at Google was more fun than I could have ever imagined. My startups were more fun. ESPN was more fun than I could imagine. College was more fun. This is the most fun. But I'm also getting older and I want to be healthy. And I consider this like a professional sport for me, which means rest and recovery and renewal are part of performance. So I'll say this is not my fun. I'll tell you what I do for fun otherwise.
By the way, I was going to ask you anyway. I was like, all right, that's all great, but tell me what you really do for fun.
Yeah. I love spending time with my family. My wife and my son, it's the three of us. And I just think we have a lot of fun. My son is 9 years old. He's really into soccer and basketball. I'm just going to go on the record because I've done it in writing. Knicks are going to win this year.
Oh, I really hope so. You don't even get me started on that.
Yeah. The last time the Knicks won, they only won twice, 73 and 70. 1970 was when my dad came to the U.S. 1973 was when my mom came to the U.S. So as a family, this is our thing. Yet in my lifetime, it's never happened. And I told my son, I was like, you're going to see more grown men cry that day on the streets of New York City than anyone else. So anyway, sports is a big part of my life. I enjoy playing. I don't play as much as I'd like anymore. I worked at ESPN, and I think it was more of a technical driver for me because they were really leading the streaming media revolution. I like running. I have this group in New York that I run with, which is now global, called Pitch and Run. That's actually how I got advice to make my angel investment in Axiom. It's a bunch of founders and VCs who run every Monday and Friday. And now it's like in Austin, Miami, LA, San Francisco, London. But yeah, and it's not so much about the running. I will say I like it. I'm a reluctant runner, but it's about the community. I like being with people. I like being around people. It energizes me. I know I do have to balance that a little bit, but it's like a flywheel for me, right? So, when I was younger, maybe it was a little more partying, maybe it was a little more, what you'd call traditional fun stuff. Yeah. Now it's really just being around people I care about.
Well, we've all been there. Ted, really appreciate you coming on to the show. Thanks for giving us the first interview. And, I will tell you, I don't typically wear a blazer on the show, but I was like, you know what? I bet Ted is going to be wearing a jacket. Nope. Like I was like, I don't want to wear a t-shirt while he's wearing a suit.
I had a very similar thought process. I said, I'll bet you he's going to be wearing a t-shirt. And I was like, but blazer's my thing, so I'll wear it. But we have our what we call our crew send-off, where It's a beautiful tradition we do at Axiom, where it's kind of the chance for the company to say, wish the crew well before they're going towards this mission. And like I said, it's one of my favorite ceremonies at the company. And for the fourth one, especially this mission, for me to be the CEO when we do it is phenomenal. And I just felt like I had to at least put on a collar. So it is a t-shirt. But it's
okay. All right.
It has a collar.
Well, the blazer was for you, my friend. So thanks for being on the show. And this will be one of many. So really excited to see you grow in the role and all the exciting things you're going to accomplish. So Tej, thanks again.
Thank you, Mo. And just quickly, I want to say, thank you for all your support of the industry. I know you doing Payload and from your previous job was work of passion and love, and it's been awesome to see your journey as well. And I'm very happy you got the first one.
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Until next time.